The checkpoint smelled like overheated plasma coils and old disinfectant, which Isaac thought was an impressive achievement, considering neither substance was supposed to have a smell. He stood on the marked circle, boots exactly where the glowing outline told him to place them, hands raised just enough to be annoying, but not enough to count as surrender. A Tal Shara guard waved a scanner over his chest with the bored precision of someone who had done this 800 times today and hated at least 700 of them. Isaac resisted the urge to offer helpful suggestions. In his experience, checkpoints were delicate ecosystems. Any sudden movement, joke, or unsolicited engineering advice could result in an alarm, a weapon discharge, or a lecture about standard procedure that lasted longer than most wars. The station itself was a marvel of layered alien logic. Nothing was symmetrical. Corridors curved gently for no obvious reason, as if the builders had been afraid of straight lines becoming politically radical. Light panels shifted color in slow, calming gradients that failed entirely at calming anyone who'd been awake for 40 hours. Somewhere deep in the structure, machinery hummed with the confident tone of systems that had never met Isaac and therefore still trusted themselves. "State your purpose," the guard said, antenna-like ridges along his helmet flicking once. "Transit," Isaac replied, "ideally without dying. Optional, but preferred." The guard paused, either considering the answer or briefly wondering how he'd ended up here instead of managing a moisture farm on a quiet moon. The scanner chirped, displeased about something trivial. Isaac glanced around. Merchants argued softly nearby. A family of 4 argued loudly. A cargo drone bumped into a wall and apologized in 3 languages. Everything felt normal in the specific, fragile way normal always did right before it shattered. That was when the station went silent. Not gradually, instantly. The hum cut off. The arguing stopped mid-syllable. Even the lights froze in an indecisive shade between blue and green. Isaac felt the hair on his arms rise, a reflex left over from battlefields and badly wired generators. The guard stiffened. "Do not move." "I wasn't planning to," Isaac said. "I like floors." Footsteps echoed down the corridor, measured, unhurried, and utterly unconcerned with the fact that an entire checkpoint had just been frozen like a paused recording. Guards snapped to attention as a small procession emerged, aides, security officers, and at the center of it all, a woman Isaac recognized only because every Tal Shara newsfeed made a point of showing her from flattering angles. Queen Nysara looked almost human. Almost. Her face carried the familiar symmetry of a human woman, her expression calm and unreadable. But her ears swept back longer than any human's, tapering elegantly and moving with subtle, unconscious twitches that suggested a mind constantly evaluating everything it saw. Her clothing was simple by royal standards, layered fabric shot through with faint circuitry that caught the light when she moved. She stopped 3 steps in front of Isaac. He swallowed, slowly, respectfully. "Hi." One of the aides inhaled sharply, as if preparing to faint on protocol grounds alone. Nysara studied him in silence. Her eyes weren't cold, but they were sharp, and Isaac had the uncomfortable feeling of being inspected the way engineers inspect a device that has clearly done something impossible. Her ears twitched. "You," she said. Isaac waited. When nothing else followed, he tried, "Yes?" She turned slightly, gesturing to a hovering display that blinked to life beside her. Images cascaded across it, grainy tactical footage, infrared scans, supply depots collapsing in neat, implausibly tidy failures. Routes blinking out, fleets stranded, command channels drowning in static and confusion. Isaac felt his stomach sink. "These events," Nysara said, her voice steady, "ended a war that had consumed 40 systems and 3 generations. Our analysts attributed them to coordinated special forces operations." Her gaze returned to him. They were not. The guard beside Isaac looked between them, deeply regretting every career choice that had led to this moment. Isaac cleared his throat. "In my defense," he said carefully, "a lot of people were wrong about a lot of things back then." Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Nysara let out a short breath that might have been a laugh, or might have been the Tal Shara equivalent of a tectonic shift. You disabled supply chains on both sides, she said. Fuel, munitions, food, even medical distribution. You collapsed fleets without firing a single shot. Shots are loud, Isaac said. Explosions, too. I was going for discouraging. Her ears flicked again, this time sharper. Why? The images shifted. A different recording appeared. Human soldiers pinned down in a ravine, smoke thick, commands overlapping in panic. Isaac recognized the terrain immediately. He always did. Some places never left you. His voice came out quieter. Because my unit died, he said, and because someone needed to make the war too expensive to continue. Nysara watched him for a long moment. Around them, an entire station held its breath. Finally, she straightened. You will come with me. Isaac glanced at the guard. Is this the part where I ask if I have a choice? You may ask, Nysara said. The answer will disappoint you. He sighed. Figures. As they turned away, the station systems came back online in a rush of sound and motion. Life resumed, unaware that something fundamental had just shifted. Isaac walked beside the queen of an alien empire, wondering, not for the first time, how fixing a broken bridge had led him here, and whether somehow he'd accidentally broken the universe into something better. Isaac learned very quickly that Tal Shara royal detention did not resemble human detention in the slightest. There were no bars, no glaring lights, no aggressive questions shouted by people who smelled of bad coffee and authority. Instead, he was guided into a quiet chamber that looked suspiciously like a well-funded research lounge. The floor was warm. The walls adjusted color based on his heart rate, which he found unsettling on a deeply personal level. Please sit, said a tall attendant, whose uniform looked ceremonial, but whose eyes missed nothing. Isaac sat. The chair adapted to him in a way that suggested it knew things about his spine he had never shared voluntarily. He decided not to think about that. Queen Nysara entered moments later, alone. No guards, no weapons. That alone made Isaac more nervous than a firing squad ever had. She gestured toward a floating projection that bloomed into existence between them. It displayed a sprawling star map, once red with conflict markers, now a patchwork of neutral zones and uneasy borders. This is how the war looked before you interfered, she said. Interfered is a strong word, Isaac replied. I prefer made deeply inconvenient. Her lips curved faintly. Her ears did not relax. She tapped the projection. The map shifted, highlighting a single supply corridor stretching across multiple systems. This route fed 3 major fleets. It collapsed within 12 hours. Our analysts believed it was sabotage by a specialized unit. Isaac nodded. Common mistake. Units have paperwork. I had insomnia. The projection zoomed again. Fuel depots blinked out one by one. Medical shipments rerouted into empty space. Ammunition stocks locked behind authorization loops that no longer recognized living officers. You targeted dependencies, Nysara said. Not weapons, not soldiers. Soldiers were already dying, Isaac said. Dependencies were optimistic. She watched him closely. You are an engineer. Unfortunately, he said, I wanted to be a botanist. Plants don't shoot back. The room shifted color slightly as his heart rate ticked up. He ignored it. Nysara waved the display away. 3 years ago, she said, you were assigned to a human combat engineering unit on the Orinth front. Isaac didn't answer. He didn't need to. The memory was already there, vivid and unwelcome. The Orinth front had been all mud, broken machines, and orders that contradicted each other with impressive confidence. His unit specialized in building bridges under fire, then watching those bridges get destroyed by artillery aimed at maps that were already outdated. They joked about it. Jokes were cheaper than armor upgrades. One night, command sent them forward to reinforce a position that intelligence claimed was lightly defended. Intelligence, it turned out, had been optimistic again. The ambush was clean, efficient, final. Isaac survived because he'd been under a vehicle, swearing at a coupling that refused to fit. When he crawled out, the battlefield was silent in the worst possible way. Back in the chamber, he exhaled slowly. I didn't decide to end a war, he said. I decided to stop listening to people who treated logistics like an afterthought. Nysara's ears dipped, a small movement, but Isaac caught it. You committed treason, she said. Yes, Isaac agreed, repeatedly, with enthusiasm. And you disabled both sides equally. He shrugged. Fairness matters. Also, if I'd favored one side, they'd have called it strategy instead of heresy. She considered that. You understood something our generals did not, she said. That war survives on momentum, on the belief that it must continue. Isaac leaned back. Momentum is just stored energy. Remove the storage, everything stops. A silence settled, not hostile but thoughtful. Nysara rose and walked to the viewport, looking out at the curve of the station against the stars. My military council believes peace is weakness, she said. They wish to resume hostilities, to finish what was interrupted. Interrupted by starvation and fuel shortages, Isaac said. Classic buzzkill. She turned to face him. They will not accept that a single human forced an empire to negotiate. Then definitely don't tell them it was mostly spreadsheets, Isaac said. For the first time, her ears relaxed fully. You are dangerous, Nysara said softly. Isaac met her gaze. Only to bad ideas. Outside the chamber, unseen systems recalibrated, quietly adapting, just as they had 3 years ago, while two unlikely allies considered how fragile wars truly were when someone finally decided to break them without firing a shot. The first thing Isaac learned after deciding to sabotage a war was that wars were held together by optimism and duct tape in roughly equal measure. The second thing he learned was that no one ever audited the people who audited supply systems, which felt like an oversight, but also an opportunity. 3 years earlier, he hadn't announced his intentions to anyone. There was no dramatic speech, no manifesto, no moment of moral clarity accompanied by swelling music. There was just a quiet night, a stolen terminal, and a logistics interface that trusted him far more than it should have. He started small, not because he was cautious, but because starting big attracted attention, and attention was what got people killed. The first failure was a fuel convoy rerouted by half a degree, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough that the autonomous freighters corrected course, burned extra fuel, and arrived late. The fleet they were supplying assumed a minor delay. Minor delays became moderate delays. Moderate delays became angry briefings. Angry briefings became orders to push harder, faster, with less margin. Isaac watched it unfold from a distance, eating a protein bar that tasted like regret. Momentum, he muttered to himself, adjusting a parameter. Meet friction. He didn't break things violently. That would have been obvious. He broke them politely. Software updates that installed correctly but interpreted data creatively. Authorization loops that required approvals from officers who had technically been reassigned but not officially removed. Maintenance schedules that stacked themselves in impossible configurations, forcing systems offline for safety reasons no one dared override. On the other side of the war, Tal Shara fleets experienced the same issues, mirrored almost lovingly. Isaac had been careful about that. If he was going to be labeled a traitor, he wanted consistency. The strangest part was how long it took anyone to notice something was wrong. Command blamed weather, then sabotage, then incompetence. They rotated officers, replaced AI subroutines, and issued stern memos that accomplished nothing except making Isaac feel vaguely insulted by their lack of imagination. He moved through war zones like a ghost with a toolkit. Sometimes he posed as a civilian contractor. Sometimes he was officially assigned, thanks to outdated personnel systems that still listed him as in transit. Once he spent 3 weeks embedded with a Tal Shara logistics hub because someone had accidentally translated his forged credentials as senior efficiency consultant, and no one wanted to admit they didn't know what that meant. The Tal Shara weren't stupid. Their systems were elegant, layered, and terrifyingly efficient, which made sabotaging them more like convincing a master pianist to play slightly out of tune. A fractional delay in synchronization here, a priority inversion there. Enough that nothing collapsed outright, but everything slowed. Soldiers noticed first, they always did. Ammunition that arrived warm instead of cold. Rations that came in the wrong order. Medical supplies that required signatures from command nodes currently unreachable due to temporary signal instability. Isaac listened to complaints over open channels, heart tight, jaw clenched. Good, he thought. Complain. Don't shoot. The breaking point came not with a battle, but with a meeting. On both sides of the war, within days of each other, commanders realized the same horrifying truth. They could still fight, but they couldn't sustain it. Fleets could deploy once, maybe twice, before supply failures grounded them. Casualties couldn't be replaced quickly enough. Medical evacuation timelines stretched from hours to days. Wars depended on certainty. Isaac had replaced certainty with questions. Who authorized this? Why is that missing? Can we afford another push? The answers were always the same. No one knew. No one could fix it quickly. And no one wanted to admit that a system designed to wage endless war had been undone without a single decisive strike. Back in the present, Nysara stood in her chamber, listening as Isaac spoke, the holographic projections dancing between them. Her ears shifted constantly now, reacting to each revelation, each quiet detail. You dismantled belief, she said slowly, not infrastructure. Infrastructure grows back, Isaac replied. Belief is trickier. She studied the projection of a stalled Talshara fleet, frozen in space years ago, its commanders arguing over supply manifests while soldiers waited. Our historians recorded this as a miracle, she said, a sudden exhaustion, a collective realization. Isaac snorted softly. It was mostly bad spreadsheets. Nysara turned to him. Do you understand what you have done to our myths? I broke them, he said. They were getting people killed. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with implications. Outside the chamber, alarms sounded briefly, then silenced themselves. Systems recalibrated. Somewhere in the station, a logistics AI adjusted its own assumptions by a fraction of a percent and felt, for the first time, uncertain. Isaac leaned back in his adaptive chair. If it helped, he said, I didn't plan to succeed. Nysara's eyes met his. That, she said, may be the most dangerous part of all. And far away in systems still scarred by a war that no one quite knew how to restart, the quiet consequences of one engineer's insomnia continued to ripple outward, unstoppable and inconvenient as truth. Isaac discovered that being the most inconvenient person in recent galactic history came with a very specific side effect. Everyone suddenly wanted a meeting. The room Queen Nysara chose for their next conversation was not a throne room. That alone told Isaac something important. There were no banners, no ceremonial guards, no symbols large enough to intimidate by scale alone. Instead, it was a circular chamber suspended over open space, the stars visible through a transparent floor that politely ignored Isaac's mild fear of falling forever. He stood near the center, hands clasped behind his back, because that seemed like a reasonable compromise between defiant and cooperative. Nysara entered quietly. Her long ears were relaxed, angled slightly outward, which Isaac had begun to associate with concentration rather than calm. She dismissed the attendants with a glance and a subtle tilt of her head. The door sealed itself, leaving them alone with the stars and several billion tons of vacuum. You are aware, she said, that half my military council believes you should be executed. Isaac nodded. That tracks. The other half believes you should be studied. That's worse, he said immediately. Scientists ask follow-up questions. One corner of her mouth lifted. Her ears twitched once, betraying amusement before she reined it in. They are afraid, Nysara said. Not of you as a person, of what you represent. Isaac looked down through the transparent floor. A Talshara cruiser drifted slowly below, graceful and heavily armed, its lights glowing softly against the dark. I represent a budget oversight, he said. Terrifying, I know. She stepped closer to the floor's edge, gazing outward. For generations, we taught our people that war ends only when one side is broken beyond recovery. You ended it by making continuation irrational. Wars hate being called irrational, Isaac said. They take it very personally. Nysara folded her hands behind her back, mirroring his earlier posture without realizing it. My generals ask why we did not foresee this, why our models failed. Because your models assume obedience, Isaac replied, and a certain level of optimism about human behavior. She turned to him. You lost your unit. Your command dismissed it as acceptable losses. Isaac felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the old instinct to deflect with humor. He let it surface, but softer this time. They sent a condolence packet, digital, misspelled one name. Her ears lowered slowly. That would have angered me. It did, he said, briefly. Then it exhausted me. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the station systems. Isaac realized, not for the first time, that Tal-Shara engineering was deeply unsettling. Everything worked too smoothly, like a machine that hadn't yet been asked a difficult moral question. My reign is not stable, Nysara said at last. The ceasefire holds because restarting the war would require admitting failure. But memory fades. Pride heals poorly. And generals get bored, Isaac added. Yes, she agreed. They do. She activated a hologram with a flick of her fingers. It displayed a layered structure of interconnected systems, civilian trade routes, medical supply chains, agricultural distribution, communication relays. Isaac leaned forward despite himself. This, Nysara said, is what my advisors propose rebuilding. Separately, militarized, controlled. Isaac grimaced. That's inefficient. And dangerous, she said. You prove that whoever controls logistics controls war. Or peace. He scratched his beard. You're thinking of weaponizing stability. I am thinking of surviving my own people, she replied calmly. Isaac straightened. Those are related problems. She studied him, eyes sharp, ears still. I want you to help me design a system that cannot be turned back into a weapon. One that makes war structurally obsolete. He blinked, once, twice. You're asking a human traitor to redesign your empire. Yes, that's bold. She inclined her head. So was stopping a war alone. He exhaled slowly, staring at the hologram as it reconfigured itself, adapting to his gaze. There's a catch. Several, Nysara said. The largest is this. You would need to speak publicly, to testify, about what you saw, about what both sides did. Isaac felt the humor drain from his face. You want me to become a symbol. I want the truth to become unavoidable, she said. Symbols fade. Records remain. He laughed once, quietly. You know humans don't like mirrors. Neither do Tal-Shara, she replied. The station trembled slightly, barely perceptible, but real. A warning tone chimed and then silenced itself. Nysara didn't look away from Isaac. That was a council vote, she said. They are already moving. He raised an eyebrow. Against me or you? She smiled thinly. Yes. Isaac considered the stars below, the warships, the systems that had once burned because no one knew how to stop. I should warn you, he said. I'm not good at politics. That, Nysara said, her ears lifting just a fraction, is why you are still alive. Somewhere deep in the station, power rerouted, doors locked, alliances shifted, and in a quiet room above the void, a queen and an engineer began the most dangerous construction project in history, one designed not to win wars, but to make them impossible. Isaac had always believed that if you wanted to understand a society's true priorities, you should listen to how it panicked. The Tal-Shara panicked elegantly. Meetings multiplied like invasive species. Councils split into sub-councils, which immediately accused one another of procedural heresy. Strategic channels filled with words like resilience, deterrence, and unacceptable precedent, all of which meant the same thing. Someone had changed the rules without permission. Isaac watched most of it from a secure observation chamber that overlooked the inner ring of the station. The chamber came with a nutrient dispenser that insisted on producing beverages optimized for cognitive serenity. Every option tasted like warm optimism. He took another sip and grimaced. Your empire is trying to think me to death, he said. Queen Nysara stood beside him, arms folded, ears angled sharply back as overlapping arguments echoed through the room's audio filters. They believe debate is a form of containment, she replied. Adorable, Isaac said. My people usually just shoot the problem. She glanced at him. They are considering that as well. That tracks too. A new projection flared into existence. Fleet formations, mobilization schedules, requisition orders sliding quietly into approved status. Isaac leaned forward, frowning. They're testing restart scenarios, he said. Low intensity, limited engagements, something symbolic. They want to prove the war can still function, Nysara said. And they'll fail, Isaac replied, but not before people die. Her ears dipped, slow and heavy. That is why they must be stopped before the attempt. The doors behind them opened without ceremony. 3 figures entered, high-ranking military officials by the stiffness of their posture and the sharpness of their expressions. They did not bow. Your Majesty, one said, tone clipped, this human has destabilized our command structure. His continued presence invites weakness. Isaac raised a hand. To be fair, it was already structurally unsound. The official ignored him. We request authorization to transfer him to military custody. Nysara did not turn. Denied. A murmur rippled through the room. He admits to sabotaging both sides, another officer said. That makes him uncontrollable. Isaac shrugged. I prefer unbiased. You propose trusting the architect of our humiliation, the first said. What message does that send? Nysara finally faced them. Her ears lifted, rigid now, a posture Isaac had learned meant danger. It sends the message that we value survival over pride. Silence fell. Thick, offended silence. You risk your throne, the officer said quietly. Yes, Nysara replied. I am aware. After they left, the chamber felt colder, though Isaac suspected that was psychosomatic. He exhaled slowly. They're going to try something. They already are, she said. There will be an attempt to bypass civilian distribution controls within the next 48 hours. Isaac rubbed his temples. They'll route supplies through temporary military oversight. Of course, she said. It's a beloved phrase. Then we need to make that phrase impossible, Isaac replied. Not blocked. Impossible. She studied him. You are smiling. I get that when I see bad architecture, he said. It's like a rash. They worked in bursts after that, short, intense sessions broken by moments of exhausted humor. Isaac sketched system concepts in the air, layers of redundancy that didn't answer to a single authority. Civilian oversight nodes, distributed verification that required consensus across populations, not just command. War hates witnesses, Isaac said, so we give logistics eyes. Nysara nodded slowly. Transparency as armor. And boredom as a deterrent, he added. If restarting a war requires 1,000 public confirmations and 6 weeks of paperwork, even generals will give up. Her ears twitched. You understand Tal Shara psychology disturbingly well. I read your manuals, he said. They're very honest about how much you hate inefficiency. An alert chimed, urgent this time. A fleet had moved, not large, not aggressive. A demonstration force. Isaac's jaw tightened. They're testing you. Nysara's expression hardened, but her voice remained calm. And you? She turned to him fully. If you remain here, you will be blamed for what follows. He met her gaze. I already am. You could flee, she said. Disappear. You are good at that. He considered it. The temptation flickered. Quiet systems, no meetings, no responsibility heavier than a malfunctioning generator. Then he remembered the ravine, the silence after. No, he said. If this is going to break, it breaks in the open. Her ears lifted, not rigid now, but attentive. Then you must prepare to speak. He grimaced. I was hoping you wouldn't say that. You will testify, she said, to our people, to yours, about what the war truly cost. Humans don't like hearing they were wrong, Isaac said. Neither do Tal Shara, she replied. We will hate you equally. He snorted despite himself. Equality at last. Outside the chamber, the demonstration fleet powered its engines, unaware that every activation added more data to a system already being rewritten around it. The war was trying to remember how to breathe. Isaac watched the stars, feeling the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. Not fear this time, but resolve. You know, he said, for someone who stopped a war, I'm terrible at resting. Nysara allowed herself a small, tired smile. Peace, she said, is more demanding than war. And somewhere between councils, code, and conscience, The future of conflict began to tilt, slowly, stubbornly, towards something it had never learned to be. Isaac had always imagined that confessing to ending a war would involve a podium, harsh lights, and someone throwing something at his head. He had not expected a circular chamber lined with living crystal, its surface alive with faint pulses that mirrored the collective heart rate of everyone watching across half the Talshara systems. "Try not to look like you're about to apologize," Nysara murmured beside him. "I am absolutely about to apologize," Isaac whispered back. "I just don't know to whom yet." Her ears tilted toward him, an intimate, reassuring gesture he had learned meant focus rather than affection. "Do not apologize for refusing to let people die efficiently." "That's going to be my opening line," he said, very diplomatic. The chamber filled as projections resolved into faces, civilians, officers, officials, entire assemblies watching from distant worlds. On the human side, feeds linked in reluctantly, framed by rigid flags and legal disclaimers that scrolled like nervous footnotes. A voice announced him with excessive formality. Isaac flinched at the sound of his full name echoing across space. He stepped forward. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was worse. It was expectant. "I'm not a hero," Isaac said, deciding immediately to abandon every prepared sentence. "If I were, I'd be taller, better rested, and considerably more photogenic." A ripple moved through the chamber. Confusion first, then something like laughter. Hesitant, uncertain, but real. "I was a combat engineer," he continued. "My job was to build things people would immediately destroy. Bridges, routes, power relays. I was very good at it. That should have worried someone sooner." On a side projection, Talshara ears twitched in synchronized micro-movements. Human officers shifted uncomfortably. "When my unit was wiped out," Isaac said, his voice steady but tight beneath the calm, "I didn't want revenge. I wanted silence. And the only way I could find it was to make the war stop cooperating with itself." Images appeared as he spoke. Supply graphs collapsing, fleets stranded, casualty curves flattening, not because of mercy, but because of logistics failure. "I didn't win," he said. "I sabotaged belief. I broke the assumption that war would always be fed, fueled, and forgiven." A human general leaned toward his microphone. "You committed treason." "Yes," Isaac said readily. "Repeatedly, against people who thought sending soldiers into impossible situations counted as leadership." A murmur rolled through the feeds. Nysara watched him closely. Her ears dipped when the first accusation came from her own council. "You exposed Talshara citizens to hardship," a military delegate said. "Medical shortages? Food delays?" Isaac nodded. "Yes. And your soldiers stopped advancing because they couldn't justify dying when the supply lines said, 'Pending review.' That wasn't sabotage. That was a pause. Your people chose not to restart." The chamber's living crystal pulsed brighter, absorbing the emotional spike. "I am not asking forgiveness," Isaac said. "I'm asking you to notice something. Every system I touch was designed to hide consequences. I didn't add violence. I removed insulation." Nysara stepped forward then, her presence cutting through the noise like a steady signal. "This is why I offered him asylum," she said, "and partnership." Gasps, objections, relief, all at once. "We are being asked to build a future where war cannot hide behind abstraction," she continued, "where logistics answer to civilians, where restarting conflict requires consent from those who will suffer first." Isaac leaned toward her. "You're doing great," he whispered. "Very inspiring." "Be quiet," she whispered back, ears flicking with amusement. A final challenge came from a human delegate, voice shaking with restrained fury. "You expect us to accept a system that makes decisive action impossible?" Isaac smiled sadly. "No, I expect you to accept a system that makes careless action expensive." Silence returned. This time it held. Hours later, when the feeds finally disconnected and the chamber dimmed, Isaac slumped against a railing, exhausted. "I think I just traumatized several governments." Nysara stood beside him, looking out into the starfield. "You gave them a mirror," she said. "They will pretend it is flawed." He chuckled weakly. "Humans hate mirrors." So do Tal-Shara, she replied. Below them, new systems activated, not weapons but protocols. Oversight nodes, civilian verification loops, the architecture of restraint, humming quietly into existence. Isaac closed his eyes. For the first time in years, there were no alarms in his head. Do you think this will hold? He asked. Nysara's ears lifted, thoughtful, not certain. No, she said honestly, but it will fail loudly. He smiled. Good. Quiet wars are the worst kind. Together they watched the stars, knowing that peace was no longer an idea, but a structure, fragile, demanding, and finally real. Isaac learned how the war finally died on a day so ordinary it felt almost rude. There was no last battle, no dramatic surrender broadcasts, no fleets colliding in a blaze of symbolism. Instead, a mid-level logistics council failed to reach quorum on a routine authorization request, and the request expired. The fleet waiting on that approval powered down, crews reassigned themselves to maintenance tasks, and by the time anyone realized what hadn't happened, it was already over. War, it turned out, could suffocate quietly. Isaac watched the confirmation scroll across a terminal while standing in a sunlit corridor of the Tal-Shara station, sipping something that claimed to be tea but tasted suspiciously like regret diluted with hope. The system message was brief, almost apologetic. Hostilities status, inactive reactivation, requirements unmet. He stared at it for a long moment, then let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. Well, he murmured, that's anticlimactic. Queen Nysara joined him, her footsteps soft, her long ears angled in that relaxed way he'd come to associate with rare, genuine relief. History often is, she said. We dress it up later to cope. Behind them, the station moved differently now. Less tension in the air, fewer hurried footsteps, fewer armed patrols pretending they were there for decoration. Civilian traffic flowed freely through corridors once restricted to military priority, and no one quite knew how to act about it yet. What happens to me? Isaac asked, not looking at her. She considered him carefully. You are officially a strategic consultant, she said. Unofficially, a persistent irritation. He smiled. I've always wanted job security. You are free to leave, Nysara continued. Or stay. Or vanish if that suits you better. There are no warrants waiting for you, on either side. That surprised him more than he expected. He turned to face her. You're serious. I kept my throne, she said simply. The council fractured, but not violently. Those who wished to restart the war discovered they no longer knew how. Power does not like being exposed. It withers. Isaac laughed quietly. All that trouble, and it turns out the secret was paperwork. Never underestimate paperwork, Nysara replied. Her ears twitched. It has toppled empires. They walked together toward an observation deck that overlooked a civilian trade hub, ships of dozens of designs docking and departing without military escort. Merchants argued over tariffs. Engineers complained about power couplings. Life, messy and stubborn, resumed its favorite activity. I used to think fixing things meant tightening bolts, Isaac said. Now I'm not sure. You loosen something instead, Nysara said. An idea. He leaned against the railing. I don't feel like a revolutionary. That, she said, is why this worked. A message chimed softly at his wrist console. A human channel. Low priority. He hesitated, then opened it. It was short. No apology. No accusations. Just an update. Unit status. Decommissioned casualty review. Reopened records. Amended. Isaac closed his eyes. The ravine. The silence. The names. They remembered, he said quietly. Nysara said nothing. She didn't need to. Later, much later, Isaac found himself in a small workshop tucked into the station's civilian ring. No guards, no councils, just tools, spare parts, and a half-finished logistics node humming gently on a workbench. He adjusted a component, tightened it, then deliberately loosened it again. Redundancy mattered. So did mercy. A young Tal-Shara engineer hovered nearby, watching him work. Is it true, she asked carefully, that you ended the war alone? Isaac snorted. Absolutely not. But the records. I interrupted it, he said. Big difference. Wars end when enough people decide not to keep them alive. She nodded slowly, ears flicking as she processed that. Will there be another? He considered the question honestly. Probably, someday, but it'll have a harder time sneaking up on everyone. That seemed to satisfy her. When he left the station weeks later, there were no ceremonies. Nysara walked him to the hangar herself, her expression composed, her ears calm. You changed, she said as they stood beside his ship. So did you, he replied. You chose truth over stability. I chose a louder stability, she said, one that argues back. He grinned. That's my favorite kind. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't ache. If you disappear, she said, do it somewhere inconvenient. Wouldn't dream of making it easy, he said. As his ship pulled away, Isaac looked out at the stars, not as battlefields, not as objectives, but as places where people lived, argued, built, and occasionally learned better. For the first time since the war, the universe felt less like a problem to solve and more like something to maintain. And that, he decided, was enough.